Hello, this is lesson 10 on news translation, and today's lesson is about translation of broadcast news and how it's different from online news and traditional news. Again, broadcast news, whether it's the radio news or the TV news, the language used should be simple, very simple, the simplest possible, very short, very clear. While traditional news, the language must be simple and short and clear. The broadcast news must be even the easiest possible, the shortest possible, the most simple possible. Okay? Usually broadcast news don't cover as much details as the traditional news because it's meant to be read, it's meant to be heard by your audience. So and it's given in a very short time, so don't use complicated language, and usually it's not that deep. It's much simpler than the news on the traditional newspaper or even the online news. For example, look at this news report on the BBC World Service website and on the BBC TV, the channel. On the web page, they use the word halted. The US halted food and aid deliveries to Eritrea. On the TV, on the channel, they use stopped instead of halted because stopped is much easier than halted, right? And you can see that it's much simpler, just 2 lines instead of 3 lines. It's much simpler in writing. In broadcast news, try to avoid the word today. While we know that what you cover most probably happened today, but try to avoid using the word today. So try to use present tense or future tense without referring or using the specific word of today. But in newspaper, when you write for newspapers, try to avoid the word yesterday. Usually, because newspapers read the news on the newspapers written today, but they will be read one day later. So if you cover something today, you cover something that happened yesterday, and it will be read tomorrow. That means if you mention something happened yesterday and somebody will read it tomorrow, it should be the day before yesterday. So always try to avoid the word yesterday when you write something for a newspaper. When you write for broadcast news, try to avoid the word today. The syntax should be very simple. The broadcast news, the syntax of your sentence much simpler than the traditional news sentence. Even though the traditional news also, the sentence there, the structure should be very simple. But in terms of vocabulary, always try to use easy words, because you know that you are reading the news and your audience will hear what you say. They don't have time to rewind, or they don't have the means to rewind and in order to listen again to what you say in case they miss something. Always learn how to edit your own writing. Always, the art of editing starts with the very basic skill, that is deleting whatever unnecessary. And again, change the English direct speech into indirect Chinese speech. Even though sometimes we keep this direct speech in Chinese too, but it's not as common as the indirect speech. Again, now where to put the source and the quote. In English, you always start with the quote and the source follows. But in Chinese, it's the other way around. You start with the source, then the English. For example, the government of Hong Kong should, then the rest of the sentence, then you close the quote, said a government official. But in Chinese, you start with the source and then the quote. So it should be 政务委员说, this is the source, then it's followed by the quote. The punctuation is very important. For example, take this sentence. We read it without any punctuation. South Africa said the Zambian leader has been found negligent in the area of human rights. Without punctuation, that means that the Zambian leader is found negligent in the area of human rights, meaning he violated human rights. But when you use punctuations in printed news, then it will be like this. South Africa, said Zambian leader, has been found negligent in the area of human rights. Now the meaning changed completely. Now we know that it's South Africa that is negligent of human rights, not the Zambian leader. When we write this news for a broadcast news, actually we don't use also these punctuations, but we need to rephrase the sentence. So it should be something like, the Zambian leader says South Africa has been found negligent in the area of human rights. This is the difference between writing for broadcast news and writing for traditional media, for a newspaper. Writing for broadcast news use the very simple structure of the sentence, like subject, verb, and object. Verb predicate must be close to the noun subject. 主语、动词 and 宾语. The last thing in today's lesson, always round up your figures. Round up figures. In traditional news coverage, we tend to translate the figures as they are. But in broadcast news translation, we round them up. For example, this sentence, on Tuesday the Commission had issued preliminary figures that it showed Milosevic had won 2,026,478 votes. But in Chinese, you don't need to write this exact figure. It's enough to say 大约200万张选票. 大约200万. This almost meaning almost or about 2 million. That's it for today's lesson. I hope it's useful, and I'll see you next time. Have a nice day.